My question was, assuming gentrification is negative and occurs in both Austin and Berlin, can Berlin or Austin offer any solutions in terms of public policy for gentrification? To answer this, we need to begin with the question, what is gentrification? Gentrification, simply put, is the process of urban rebuilding accompanying the influx of middle-class or affluent people into deteriorating areas that often displaces poor residents. To paraphrase a recent Atlantic article, gentrification is largely a class issue, but due to the history of the United States, we have made it largely a race issue. In this way, it is still very much a race issue. To really understand gentrification, we also have to understand what causes it and why it can be harmful. Gentrification occurs, specifically in these two cities, when low-income areas become more desirable to newer, wealthier residents. In both Austin and Berlin, this gentrification is demarcated by certain hipster and artsy culture, which certain areas become seen as hip or up-and-coming, leading to investment. Unfortunately, this often leads to the eviction or displacement of long-term residents of the community and changes the community as a whole. This occurs because gentrifiers drive up property values. This causes many landowners and landlords to keep their apartments in bad conditions in order to evict current residents or to renovate their property for wealthier residents. Aside from renters, long-term homeowning residents are often evicted due to rising property taxes that make living in an area unaffordable. This can be seen all over Austin, especially in 78702, the neighborhood surrounding Keeling, being one of the fastest gentrifying neighborhoods in the country. Some sell gentrification as a positive due to the fact that these newer residents are often accompanied by higher property values, better civil services, and reduction in crime. Yet these ideas are rebutted by the fact that these improved services are not provided to the original residents of the neighborhood, as by the time these services have improved, the original residents have usually been forced to move. This leaves many original residents not only disenfranchised and resentful towards the state, but also questioning why these improved services are only provided when newer residents move into a neighborhood. Prenzlauerberg, a traditionally working-class neighborhood in Berlin, serves to provide a good example of this gentrification in Berlin as a whole. Myron Lovine, in a recent scholarly article, analyzed just that. The analysis concluded that beginning in 1989, with the fall of the wall, the government of Berlin helped to develop crucial parts of Prenzlauerberg neighborhood, which had rapidly deteriorating infrastructure at the time. This renovation was done with the, quote, strong consciousness of city building as a public enterprise with sensitivity towards squatters and alternative housing communities. That said, market plays a very important role in gentrification, and overall it was these market forces combined with the promotion of gentrifying cultures, that I'll talk about later, by the state, that led to gentrification in this neighborhood in the late 2000s and early 2010s. After that brief introduction, let's talk more about gentrification in Berlin. While we may be somewhat familiar with gentrification in Austin, let's review how this phenomenon manifests itself in Berlin. In Berlin, Germany, gentrification is caused by a similar hipster culture that occurs in Austin. Here, the people being displaced are mostly Turkish working-class immigrants. These hipsters are classified as quote-unquote middle gentrifiers, who serve to make an area artsy and desirable while pushing up housing prices. This mentality is almost identical to the process occurring in East Austin. The two cities are also similar in the fact that they have a growing tech market, Silicon Hills in Austin and Silicon Alley in Berlin, which brings a lot of young middle-class people into the city. Berlin, though, is slightly more progressive than Austin due to the fact it has Mietrecht, or renters' rights. To give you a scope of gentrification in Berlin between 2007 and 2013, housing prices in the cities increased more than 30%. This issue is so bad that even subsidized social housing in these historically poor neighborhoods of Berlin are increasingly becoming unaffordable to native residents. Now that we've covered Berlin, It is also important to look at how the history of Austin has led to segregation of the city and its subsequent impact on gentrification. Starting in 1928, the city began to zone, designating certain areas so-called Negro districts, giving its African American residents access to public services such as power, schooling, and parks only if they were in these designated districts. This relocated many black families to the east side of town and cemented segregation in the city. This was further promoted with the New Deal program in 1935, which was designed to restore wealth lost during the Great Depression, yet largely excluded minority communities. This segregation of the two sides of Austin continues in many ways to this day. Since segregation was instituted in the city, the east side has fallen victim to systematic discrimination in terms of city resources, quality of education, and public investment overall. Now, these residents of the east side who have been largely marginalized by the state are being forced to move due to rapidly rising property taxes. This is very unfortunate, and there's a palpable irony to the situation in the fact that it was a white-dominated state that sidelined the city's black residents for almost 100 years, and now it's mostly white affluent citizens who are making many black residents' homes unaffordable. It's also worth mentioning that Austin is one of the only growing cities with a declining African American population. Continuing off of this, in the last 5 years, the rate of gentrification in Austin has only been intensifying. This is due to a large influx of investment as well as a lack of real estate regulation. Austin has a rapidly emerging industry of short-term rentals, or STRs, which help to spur gentrification by demolishing houses to convert them into properties that can be rented during festivals on sites such as Airbnb.com. Similar to Berlin, there are city codes limiting these properties, yet both cities lack the manpower to enforce these codes. Due to this gentrification, many properties have more than doubled in price since native residents have bought them, making property taxes unaffordable for a large amount of these native residents. One article answers my question by providing an account of the current nature of gentrification in Austin and how its often destructive tendencies. An example of this occurring at the last South by Southwest was with the piñata shop Jumpolin. In February, a piñata shop Jumpolin on the east side of town was demolished in the developer's rush to capitalize on South by Southwest. The owners of Jumpolin were not given any chance or warning about this demolition, and were not even given the opportunity to move out their merchandise. It is in this way that the whole character of neighborhoods is changed with gentrification, as not only the residents change, but the businesses as well. These new businesses that come to occupy gentrifying neighborhoods often make changes without consideration for cultural capital. An example that was provided was one of a local bike shop painting over historic and significant murals in the east side of town. Another, more academic source, pulled together ideas on gentrification and hipsters in Austin. It also added that gentrification is often marked by certain types of businesses catering to the wealthier populace. These businesses include coffee shops and cupcake shops, and in some areas of the country, even mayonnaise shops. Through the emergence of these businesses, replacing old ones, gentrification can begin to be documented, formally. My last source ties this discussion together. Currently, many cities are being hailed as quote-unquote New Berlins. These so-called New Berlins include Leipzig, Krakow, Vilnius, Belgrade, and Warsaw, along with other Eastern European cities. Berlin's image is also a product of Berlin selling itself as quote-unquote poor but sexy to try and attract tourists. Cities also do this in order to rebrand themselves as a quote-unquote creative hub and subsequently spur gentrification. It does this by talking about how governments often try and perpetuate hipster cultures that drive gentrification, as this gentrification brings more tourism and investment to these cities. Conversely, however, this often allows people with the largest amount of money to displace working class or immigrant communities. And by perpetuating this culture and not protecting its citizens, the state fails its citizens, which it should be helping and protecting from forces such as gentrification. In a quote-unquote conscious capitalist society, the state is supposed to act in a way that protects its most vulnerable citizens from the often volatile and predatory market. Yet it is increasingly being shown that states all over the world are not only neglecting this duty, but further perpetuating the exploitation and marginalization of some of their most defenseless residents. Unfortunately, my research has led me to the conclusion that neither Austin nor Berlin have any exceptional solutions. Further, they're both showing dismaying signs of gentrification with no real intervention on behalf of the state, or very minimal in the case of Berlin. Yet, the situation is not totally hopeless as there are solutions available, such as grandfathering certain tax rates for or increased renter protection. The main issue is that there's a large lack of political will to enact these changes.